Hello, my name is Ryan Fritz. I am going to talk to you today about advanced strength training. A little bit of history about myself. I have a degree in exercise and sports science. I'm a certified personal trainer. I have a couple of certifications in muscle activation, resistance training specialist. I have a chiropractic assistance license, and I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I also founded my company, which is called Science of Cardio. I wanted to start out by saying through my personal experience in education, there's no right or wrong way to do something. There's only safe and unsafe. I understand that everybody's an individual and has different needs and requirements. And I just want to let you guys know that everything that we're going to discuss is different for every person, every athlete, client, and you just should have some sort of justification on the decisions that you're making. Again, there's kind of a million ways to accomplish the same goal, just which is the most effective or best way to do that. Goal setting. Goal setting is super important to maximize the efficiency at which you get to your end goal. Biggest thing is specificity or the purpose of the goal. Is it a sport specific goal or a kind of physiology goal? What are all the parameters that go into that? Goals should be super specific. You should have long term goals and short term goals. Biggest thing is having purpose behind what you're doing. Some kind of thoughts that I usually use is kind of muscular and cardiovascular goals. Having both of those mindsets of muscular, cardiovascular for endurance, for power, strength, and then also thinking about time or duration of those goals, and then also thinking about rest and rest intervals in between your sets. Stress and adaptation. When you're exercising, you want to kind of have this focus on obviously you're stressing the body through strength training or conditioning. You're applying that stress to get adaptation or a result or benefit from that stress. So some things to think about are long-term stresses on the body. How are you stressing it and allowing that to recover? Also, short-term stress. You know, is that stress positive or negative stress on the body, long-term and short-term? Not all stresses are good for the body, so that may lead to injuries or pains or problems or surgeries. Another principle I use is overload. Obviously, you're trying to increase the stress to increase the outcome of whatever you're stressing. I also like to use the use it or lose it. If your body's not using something, then it tends to decline in performance. And then last but not least is specificity, the type of stress you're throwing on the body. Is it sport or activity specific? And is it going to reach your goal that you're shooting for? There's a cool little note down here. Strength training equals motion, position, resistance, time, exertion, and intensity. Those are some good things to think about when you're throwing stress on a athlete or client. So moving forward, this is just an overview about training principles that we're going to discuss. These are some things that I use for designing periodization for clients and athletes. Very, very key element to what I do for getting results. So some things that I think about while designing a program are hormonal training, maybe tempo training, time under optimal tension. There's also volume training, energy systems development through strength or cardiovascular exercise. You can also look at nervous system training or rest, recovery, and regeneration. So hormonal training is a really cool topic, and I use it a lot when I'm designing programs. You always want to think about reps, rest intervals, and intensity. Those are going to drive which hormones are being released. So you can kind of see that these charts give us a little bit of information. This top chart on the right side goes into kind of your training objectives, your strength, power, hypertrophy, and endurance, and it goes into your rep ranges and load percentages. Kind of the chart below that is very similar as far as rest periods for those goals. So depending on the goal and what you're trying to accomplish with a client, you can use human growth hormone, which is going to increase hypertrophy. There's insulin-like growth factor, which is going to be a result after training. You're also going to have testosterone releases, which is going to improve strength and muscle mass. But something to be aware of is cortisol levels. Those increase or go up with lack of sleep, poor nutrition, overtraining, or stress, and cortisol can lead to increased fat levels. So just some things to think about. Hormonal training is going to have different effects, so you want to be aware of that when you're designing your rep sets, loads, and your rest intervals. So this next chart is just a good example of kind of the physiological actions that happen from hormonal training. It goes through the endocrine system and what hormone is being used and what happens physiologically. From a training standpoint, this is a very powerful tool. It can make or break your results in kind of your program design. If you have counteracting hormones, you might get a altered result from what your goal is. You can also use this information to help promote, increase, and make your goals more effective and efficient. So tempo training is another great principle. Utilizes time under optimal tension. So there's different parts of a movement. You have an eccentric, an isometric, and a contraction phase. You can play with the variables or the timing of that, and you can change the intensities by moving those times around. So traditional movement would be an eccentric maybe for 4 seconds, an isometric for 0, 1 or 2 seconds, and then a concentric for 1 to 2, 3 seconds. So that gives you a lot of options to manipulate to create progress or progressions for your training. Isometric training is a really neat principle. You're using time under tension again. You can keep it in different positions. The thing that's nice about this is it allows you to adjust if a person has an injury or limitation in range. You can modify that based on their needs, and then you can progress or modify, change those times under tension. Last but not least is the eccentric training. This is the traditional negative training or negative phase only training. Good example of a negative would be doing a push-up. You would lower yourself down real slowly, and then you'd come back to your start position. You may do a couple reps of those, working on that kind of slow eccentric or negative training side. So nervous system training is an overlap of a couple different training principles. Depending on what your goals, demands, and needs are, that's going to affect how many motor neurons are recruited and what they need to do to elicit a muscle contraction. Another factor is going to be the Golgi tendon organ that is going to change or affect range of motion through a joint. And then the nervous system is also going to have effect on balance and stability. So these are just kind of some thoughts on designing a program and periodization. So volume training is a pretty heavy topic. Volume, again, can be good or bad for certain people. It comes down to whether that volume is safe or unsafe for a client athlete. So volume training is really cool. It is basically an overload principle. You increase the stress, the amount of work, and the motor recruitment is severely increased, which again, all those things create adaptation. So if the person can tolerate it, awesome. If they can't tolerate, you're going to have a lot of problems from doing this. Um, so again, there's a lot of different ways to do volume training. There's a traditional German 10 by 10. This is what this chart is showing here. You can also do concentric, eccentric, traditional training. You can do isometric um, volume training. You can do eccentric training, which is your negative, eccentric less, which is pretty cool. It's a contraction only uh, training, and then you have your plyometric. So essentially, just increasing the volume. You're maybe going from 3 sets to 5 sets. Maybe doing 8 sets of 3, 10 sets of 10. So you're getting a lot of volume, and again, caution that with risk to injury and overtraining. So energy systems development, or ESD, this is kind of your traditional cardiovascular or conditioning training. I typically use kind of heart rate zone training. I specialize in doing VO2 testing. So this is really, really cool and neat ways to train. I'm a huge proponent of low impact or non-impact exercise modalities. With my experience working with professional athletes or overweight people, the last thing you want to do is have somebody running, pounding, slamming their joints, putting a lot of stress on their joints if they're 100 pounds or 200 pounds overweight. So that kind of low impact is the way to do that. You can use heart rate training with a low or non-impact exercise modality to maximize the benefit of cardiovascular effect. Essentially, you are putting less stress on the joints, and you use heart rates to kind of challenge or create the intensity. So essentially, their program is very individualized from the heart rate, and that adjusts and change based off of age, gender, individuals' genetics. So a lot of variables there to consider. And then, essentially energy systems development, you're looking at the 3 energy systems: ATP or creatine phosphate energy system, the glycolysis or glycolytic energy system, and then the Krebs cycle. And you're specifically designing a program based off of those energy systems and what they can do. So you can see that these charts give us an idea of those 3 energy systems and kind of the duration and what classification, aerobic or anaerobic system they're using, and then what happens inside the body from an energy source standpoint. Or you might be challenged with different goals, so you want to have a focus and an idea of what happens on an energy usage system, and how that can help you out with reaching goals for your clients. Olympic and powerlifting. Again, these are just some different methods or techniques to use for athletes or clients. Great exercises if they're taught and performed or executed properly. There's a very high level kind of skill in order to complete these. These are not beginner movements. Neat thing about them is they really improve power and explosion. They require a lot of motor recruitment. Many muscles get involved. There's a great hormonal increase because of the heart rate, and then you have the caloric expenditure is usually pretty significant. So you may use this for your clients or athletes depending on their goals. It might be a weight loss technique or hormonal release, or working on speed explosion and power output. So again, nothing fancy, should be stuff that you already know. So core and functional training is kind of a newer topic. Have mixed feelings about it. This is kind of a thing that if you have more questions about, you can discuss it with me through email or in person later on. Basically, core and functional training is kind of using the core or midsection, kind of your shoulders down to your hips, using kind of multi muscles, looking at a lot of motor recruitment. This is going to be a great effect for using lots of calories and a high kind of nervous system demand. And again, working on kind of rotation and stability and different ways to kind of get multi joints to contract and work together. Some examples of this are kind of lunge row or a lateral lunge and deltoid fly. A chest fly with shoulder abduction, or a squat press, burpee, or lateral lunge or upright row combo. So kind of combining a lot of movements together to be very efficient from a time standpoint and also caloric or energy demand. Periodization. So this is a huge topic. There's no way I can cover all this in this seminar. This is a seminar in itself. So I'll kind of hit some highlight points of it. Periodization is kind of a model set up for people to design programs for looking at kind of short-term and long-term and kind of putting everything together holistically and being able to zoom in and zoom out depending on a goal or a season or progression. So essentially you're looking at kind of a macro cycle, which is typically or traditionally a year. If you have an off season, a prep, in season, transitions and different things, you want to kind of map that out for 52 weeks. And then you kind of break those parts down into kind of mesocycles. So your mesocycles might be competition or a preseason or in-season kind of phases. And then again, taking that kind of another step further, you're looking at microcycles. This is more of a kind of day-to-week thing. What are we doing on Monday and how's that different from Wednesday? And we have a game on Friday. So you kind of putting all those pieces together to look at a kind of an overview of everything, but you're also very specific and zooming in onto the day-to-day basis and maybe changing up the phases as you go through the macro cycle. So here's an example of a software that I use in trying to put a kind of a year-long periodization plan together for a team or a client. As you can see, they have kind of the days broken down, the months broken down, the phases, the training cycles, the sub-phases, mesocycles. You go into all the details of strength, speed, agility, conditioning, nutrition. You're basically looking at every possible scenario that you can train and do throughout a year, and you have everything broken down into pieces. So again, this is kind of what I call reverse engineered plan. You kind of setting everything up with a specific goal, and you're looking at all the parts and the pieces that come into play and have influences on that goal. So here's another example of a energy systems development or cardiovascular or conditioning periodization model. This is set up for an entire year, and then you can kind of see the different color phases. Those are kind of your microcycles. The yellow is an easy conditioning day. Green is a medium, kind of working on ventilation threshold, and then the red day is interval training, working on kind of the Krebs cycle or the creatine phosphate energy systems. So this is kind of a periodization, kind of looking at different parts of the year, looking at the individual days, and then if you look on the left, there's the mesocycles. You can, figure out what your goal is, short term, midterm, and long term. So very, very neat ways to look at the year in a whole, and also go back and reference and say, all right, where did I do bad? How can I improve? How can I fix my progressions for next season or year? So pretty neat stuff. So moving right along to workout prescriptions. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do a workout or a program or periodization. It just comes down to what's the best way to do it, what's the most efficient, and how can I get the best results without hurting or injuring somebody. So this is just one example of a workout that you could do with a client or an athlete. This is stuff that I have done traditionally in the past. Again, there's no right or wrong. So I might start out doing an active warm-up, doing a dynamic movement type of progression to get blood flowing and get a client moving. I might move into a strength phase and kind of emphasize prehab exercises, which are basically kind of a warm-up type of movement specific to a joint. So it might be internal and external shoulder rotation, or doing ankle flexion, dorsal flexion. Maybe a hip circle or something like that to get the joint movement kind of oiled and lubed up. You may move into core lifts, which is your traditional squats, bench, deadlift. Do kind of the more energy demand stuff up front, and then move into auxiliary lifts, bicep curls, calf raises, abs. Again, no right or wrong way to do that. And then I would follow up by doing some kind of a conditioning ESD program, and that might be a specific goal of, all right, well, I'm trying to pre-fatigue them, and let's work on endurance at the end of the training program, just to kind of progress the program or the day, and then go for that endurance fatigue side of the training, and then finish up with a cool down. So again, no wrong or right way to do this, but using your training principles, you may do a strength lift and a power lift, and then kind of work into a muscular endurance auxiliary exercise. So there's lots and lots of ways to couple and pair things together to maximize the results and effectiveness of what you're prescribing to a client or athlete. So another thought, if you're training somebody and they plateau and you're trying to figure out what to do, you may take this workout that I just kind of proposed and you can flip it. You might do your cardiovascular or endurance stuff first and go more into a kind of reverse order auxiliary core lift and prehab, maybe work on some movement, range of motion things at the end. Again, there's no right or wrong. It's just what is effective, what works, and you basically need information to go off of and to make decisions and modify to increase or change your results. So dynamic warm-up, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Essentially, dynamic warm-up is an active movement. The purpose is to try to decrease injury by getting the GTOs, Golgi tendon organs, activated. We're looking to increase power output, increase blood flow, and the heart rate. Again, there's been a lot of research and studies saying out that traditional static stretching actually has a decrease in power output. So it doesn't make sense to desensitize or shut down a muscle or muscle spindle before activity. So you might want to kind of think about that process a little bit more in depth. The intent is to increase range of motion and prepare somebody for movement. There needs to be a kind of an audit and a check and make sure that what you're doing is tolerable for a client or athlete, and is it improving and helping them to perform better, or is it not doing that? So you need to do some sort of a lab test and research with a client or clients or athletes to assess and figure that information out. So this is a little bit of review, essentially just what are the principles of muscle contractions? You have concentric contractions, which is the shortening of a muscle, and you have an eccentric muscle contraction, which is the elongation or negative phase of movement. And then you have an isometric, which is a couple of different things. It's either something staying the same or not moving, but there's constant tension on the muscle and the joint. And then the last type of muscle contraction is a plyometric. It's an explosive or ballistic movement that is done. So some helpful kind of things that I think about when I'm writing a program up for somebody is first kind of progression. Where are we headed? How do we improve and get better results? Also, something to keep in mind is muscle confusion. Does your body plateauing, or are you getting the same results that you started with? Is things not improving or changing from where you started? Obviously, in anything with strength and conditioning, if you're not getting results, then why are you doing something? So you need to rethink that and reassess that. So some other thoughts is balance. You may have muscle imbalances, so you always want to be thoughtful and consider kind of upper, lower body movements, medial or lateral, front to back, superior, inferior, those different kind of planar things that your joints do, and just make sure everything's balanced. And again, kind of variety with kind of getting things to change. Same stress equals the same results. So you need to consider and think about progressions, regressions, time under tension, load, position, or angle as variables to modify if things aren't changing, or you're trying to improve and progress up to the next level. So record keeping is a huge topic again. I don't know if I can cover all of that in a seminar. There's just endless possibilities, lots of ways to do it. You can do it traditional, writing things down. There's lots of softwares that allow you to do it. Really cool biofeedback tools, heart rate monitors, and different programs and apps that you can get or gather information. Really, really neat time in technology to be able to get information instantly from a client and not even be with them. So record keeping is an open-ended forum. You can record keep anything and everything that you want to, whether it be strength, postural, analysis, assessments, cardiovascular, heart rate. The list is endless, and I highly recommend a good record keeping system, whatever you use or do. And that is a great tool to go back and look and reassess or evaluate kind of where you've been, where you're going, what's happening with somebody. So now that you have all your record keeping stats, you can go back and look and analyze your data and kind of figure out whether your program is working or if you should tweak it or modify it. Essentially, what we're trying to do with a program is we're trying to stress somebody through exercise and then have them what's called super compensation or improve after they're recovered. So this might be on a day-to-day basis. We did this workout today and we stressed them, and then tomorrow we're going to rest or recover them, and we're hoping that on the next session they're stronger, or the next week they're stronger. So you can look at this as a micro, meso, and macro cycle. You might go from A to B, or week 1 to week 52, and you're trying to increase improvement. Essentially, when the body recovers, that's when it improves. So the supercompensation part of that is after the body recovers, does it have better performance, or is it stronger? So again, this is a topic very, very detailed, and I can't cover it. So this is just tip of the iceberg touch on supercompensation. When you stress something out, it recovers, it adapts hopefully, and gets better, stronger, faster, whatever the stress and goal and result are. So just something to think about. So overtraining is something that is very important. Again, data and record keeping are great looks into if somebody's overtraining. Again, the thought and idea is we want this kind of balance. We don't want to undertrain or overtrain. So we're trying to figure out what's the best solution, what's the most optimal way to get the fastest, best results without getting hurt, but also doing that efficiently. So some overtraining kind of symptoms. I'll let you read through this list, and I have kind of some key points that I look at. I usually look at increase in resting heart rate is a great indicator if somebody's overtrained. So you would probably need like a heart rate monitor or to do a time test for your heart rate on your wrist or your carotid artery. Some other things are drop in performance. That's a huge thing. So again, if you're collecting data, getting the information, you should be able to see that. That may be picked up in power output. So that's another thing that I usually look at. Their, vital numbers may improve and their power output may decrease. So that's an indicator or a sign of possible overtraining. Usually kind of appetite and moods or depression lead to overtraining as well. And then kind of this next chart, again, just kind of goes into things that happen with overtraining. Usually I try to set my cycles to 3 to 4 weeks to prevent from overtraining. If you're going really, really hard and aggressive, your body's only going to be able to do that for a certain time. So, that's where rest and recovery come into play. Resting throughout the week, resting day to day, and just having a great idea and a thought process behind all those components that kind of work together. If you look at the top chart on the right, essentially the prep phase, you're basically shocking the body. You're hoping that it adapts and gets better. There's kind of a couple different roads. You're either going to plateau, which is that pink dotted line. You're getting the same results out of what you're doing to it. If you're periodizing or you're doing everything right with your super compensation and you're overreaching, you're going to get a progression or improvement. And then if we're not doing any sort of periodization at all, you're probably going to overtrain and you're going to have a decrease in performance, which is that yellow line. So very, very important to get data, gather information, modify, tweak, and adjust things based off of that data that you're gathering. The body, tells you what's happening inside on a physiological basis. So I'm really big on biomarkers and getting that instant physiological feedback versus verbal feedback. Order of exercises. Gonna just talk on this briefly. Essentially, the thought behind that is to work on more nervous system demands to less nervous system demands, or bigger muscle groups, multi-jointed movements, and then you kind of work down. The idea or thought process behind that is, things like a squat or power clean or deadlift require a lot of motor recruitment, so you don't want to have your nervous system shot from doing smaller movements. Then you go into a high demand exercise like a deadlift and you just can't perform the same. So something to think about, keep in mind. Again, there's no right or wrong way depending on what your goal and justification is. You can take that any which way that you want to. So here's some examples of different things that you can do. Traditionally you would start out with your Olympic lifts and go into kind of your core or multi-jointed movements, and then you go into specific jointed movements, and then finally hitting single jointed movements. So hydration, again, I could talk about this forever. I'm just going to touch some points. Biggest thing with athletes or exercise is dehydration. So here's a list of signs and symptoms of dehydration: headache, nausea, loss of economy or movement, uh, sleepiness or restlessness, and thirst. Um, your body loses water through sweating, breathing, going to the bathroom, and also caffeine. So you might want to think or talk with people about coffee or supplements when it comes to hydration effects. Um, there's a chart in the left lower corner that's color of urination. So there is some scientific research. The darker your urine is, the more dehydrated you are. So again, food for thought. Should be pretty standard stuff that you should have a thought or idea on already. So nutrition is a huge topic. Just endless possibilities, lots of variables, very individualized. I'll just hit some key points. Really big on branched chain amino acids post workout, help with recovery and building of tissues. Depending on the goal or energy usage, you may have to do a pre workout supplement. You know, the meals may have to increase depending on the expenditure, and vitamins and minerals is going to be a double-edged sword. If you're getting too much or too little of something, you're going to have health effects based off of that. So big thing, just be thoughtful about nutrition. I usually refer out to some dietitians or specialists when it comes to really getting in depth and specific for each individual on nutrition. So back into kind of some strength routines. There is a million ways to skin a cat. You can obviously do different types of movements. Biggest thing here is I just want to emphasize you can do exercises or routines every day. You can do them every other day. You can do them once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. Again, there is a lot of principles based off of how your body responds, how quickly it adapts. A lot of individualization here. It may work for one person, it may not work for another person. Be thoughtful of the stress and the loads that you're putting on people, the rest, recovery. All those are going to have uh, weighted factors on whether their performance improves or decreases. So some just generic strength routines are your traditional push-pull. So again, you could do a push upper body, a pull lower body, or a push one day and a pull another day. You can do, an upper lower split where you're doing upper body one day, a lower body another day. You can do a 2-a-day routine of that where you do upper body in the morning, lower body in the evening. You have your total body routines where you're going through everything. Isometric type of routine where you're just doing isometric movements. Again, depending on goal and need, demand, you can use those to effectively get results. Obviously your eccentric and plyometric type of routines where you're doing ballistic movements or negatives. You can combine these things together. You can do one exercise as an eccentric, another exercise as a plyometric. You can have certain days or certain weeks where you do eccentric training or concentric only training. Again, endless possibilities, but these are just some variables. You have your traditional bodybuilder routine where you do back and buys one day, chest and tries another day, legs and shoulders on different days. You can do those twice a week, 3 times a week. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve. So rest and recovery, regeneration are huge parts on the adaptation phase or process. Lots of variables, lots of things that you can adjust, tweak, or modify to improve your performance or outcome or get results. These are just some kind of bullet points that you can kind of review and look over. Again, this is a very huge variable, so there's a whole discussion or seminar just on these techniques. So strength routines, again, lots of variables to play with. You have kind of your standard 2 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10, 4 sets of 10, traditional kind of loads or strength routines. I'm going to go over some different ones and just give you some other options or possibilities on things that you can do. Again, you can combine these. You can do them separately. The endless kind of possibility. You can do whatever you want to. Again, there's no right or wrong. There's only safe and unsafe, and what's the most efficient way to get to your end result. So some other cool options are what's called a wave set. So this might be a kind of one set of 6, one set of 3, one set of 5, one set of 2, one set of 7. So you're going up and down on your rep schemes as you do different sets. I already kind of went over the volume training, the German 10 by 10, or you can do kind of more of a strength paradigm of 8 sets of 3, hypertrophy of 5 sets of 12. Some really cool stuff with that you can play with and adjust. You have your kind of endurance training, which is your 15 plus reps. You're just cranking out as many as you can. That's more of a metabolic effect. Again, depending on your goal or phase or whatever your focus is, you can adjust those. You have your isometric, where you're holding something for a certain given time. You have your eccentric, where you're playing with the negative or the elongation part of the muscle. And then you can go into tempo training, and you can change the tempos. There's lots of variables and different things you can do. Again, there's endless possibilities with that. You can do a 10-10-10 tempo. You're doing an eccentric for 10 seconds, holding for 10 seconds, and then a concentric movement for 10 seconds. You got anaerobic threshold training, which is pretty cool. This might be doing something as fast as you can for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, working on more of a metabolic effect. Again, goal specific and goal related. If you're trying to build strength, you shouldn't be doing stuff for 90 seconds as fast as you can. That's going to be a different kind of energy system that your body's going to use to do something like that. And then you got your ballistic or plyo movements. And isotonic, you're pushing or pulling against something that's not moving. So you can load up a ton of weight on a bench press and push into it, and it's not going to move because you don't have the force to move that object. So some different thoughts on strength training routines. So last but not least is RTS and MAT. RTS is resistance training specialist, and MAT is a muscle activation technique. Muscle activation technique is a procedure that looks at range of motion. It's an assessment that looks at bilateral range of motion, and it addresses postural strength or positional strength at a joint. I use it as an auditing tool to check and see if a person should be or should not be doing a movement or exercise. I also use it to test and check an exercise. Is this exercise appropriate, or should they be doing this modality? So this is kind of my safe way of checking and keeping people from doing silly things that put a lot of stress on their joints. So that's the MAT process. And then our RTS, resistance training specialist, is a really cool kind of physics-based training style or methodology. It looks at kind of stress that's placed through joints, and it looks at kind of the process of loading and unloading and stressing joints. And then it's a kind of a form of critical thinking about moment arms, resistance profiles, how you're loading or what are you doing with end range movements, and what's happening at the shortened position of a muscle contraction. So real technical stuff. Again, that kind of strength training at the bottom, motion, position, resistance, time, exertion, and intensity, those are all factors of RTS. So very, very cool stuff, very high level of thinking through exercise, physiology, range of motion, anatomy, and this is a real career changer, and I highly recommend you check out these companies, their websites, and explore kind of the RTS and MAT worlds. So to review, there's no right or wrong way to do exercise or movement. There's only safe and unsafe. Again, everything's individualized for each client, and there's a million ways to do something or accomplish a goal. And finally, you should have kind of a justification on a decision that you're making as a health professional. So I want to thank you for spending time and watching and participating in this seminar with me. Hopefully, I have enlightened your health and fitness professional career. And if you have any questions, please email me. You can contact me through my website. And good luck and happy training.